Hello, life group teachers. Good to see you again. Want to thank everyone. You're doing a great job. I've been visiting the classes along with Brother Josh, and I've been excited of hearing the great teaching that's going on. Also, the participation that you guys are having in your life group classes. Love to hear the feedback that you're allowing even the students to answer questions, and you're probing their minds and allowing them to think about certain things. And it's been great. I've enjoyed it. And I know Brother Josh have also enjoyed it. But let's go for this week's lesson, Esther chapter 6, verse 1. And the king honors Mordecai. That's the subject. The student will learn that God will lift those he needs to be lifted and bring down those that need to be brought down. That's the lesson aim that we have for this week. So when we look at this, we know it's almost incredible circumstances point to God's hand guiding the course of events. The entire course of history for the Jewish nation was changed because a pagan king, hundreds of miles from the center of God's activities in Jerusalem, could not sleep. Jewish people all over the Persian Empire, and especially in Palestine itself, were unaware of God's dealings till long after the fact. It's amazing because like this whole book of Esther, we see God's sovereignty, we see his hand at work, but there are people that are in other areas of the world, even at this time, those that were in Jerusalem didn't know what was going on. And a lot of times, even when we are in circumstances, our own selves, when we go through difficulties, a lot of times we may not see or feel that God is working, but just rest assured, God is working on your behalf behind the scenes. Amen. So verse 1, it says, on that night could not the king sleep, and he commanded to bring the book of records of the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. This is during the night before Esther's second banquet. Xerxes, he was unable to sleep. So every time you see this Xerxes, I'm gonna say Xerxes, they're the same person, but King Xerxes I can pronounce that easier. So the author had not written why Esther asked for a delay before telling the king her request. Remember last chapter, the king asked her for a request. She said, well, we'll wait till the next banquet. But you do have some theologians believe that that last banquet was like that of a wine banquet, and they had gotten drunk, and that was not the time for Esther to make a request. Because, you know, when you see people who are drunk, they're really not in the right mind. They may say something that they don't mean. So therefore, Esther had to wait for the right time, which would be this second banquet that we're getting ready to talk about or lead up to, the second banquet. So here the king, that night, he could not sleep all night. He was restless. And a lot of times when you have a restless night and you cannot sleep, there's something really on your mind, and there's something that's really bothering you. It could be, well, a lot of times parents, they used to say they couldn't sleep until their child got home, you know, because they were just so worried about that child. They couldn't sleep. They walked all night. But when that child got into the house and safety, then they were able to sleep. So this is one of those nights that King Mordecai is having, that of insomnia. He just can't sleep this night. So he commands them to bring the book of records of the Chronicles, that they be read before him. And these chronicles that were read before him, We see extra biblical sources confirm that the Persian kings maintained an elaborate recording system. Herodotus noted that the king kept especially clear records of those who served him well. So once again, God's sovereignty is evident. So we see they're reading these chronicles of records of what has happened in the past, and then not even that, even under his kingship. And so verse 2, it says, and it was found written that Mordecai had told of Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's chamberlains, the keepers of the door, who sought to lay hand on the king Xerxes. And the king said, what honor and dignity hath been done to Mordecai for this? Then said the king's servants that ministered unto him, there is nothing done for him. Even in this time, we see Mordecai, he had told of these two people, they had plotted to do away with King Xerxes. So in essence, this Mordecai, he saved the king's life. And this was like 5 years later, then now they're reading it. And the king has not even rewarded Mordecai, even not yet, of the deed that he had done, the deed of saving his life. So we see he's listening to it, and then he's listening that nothing was done, because for a king, like I said, they kept good records. And for those that treated him well and served him well, they wrote down things that they did for these people. But there was nothing written down, nothing that was done for Mordecai. And see, 5 years later, Mordecai did not say anything about it. He didn't try to get a plaque. He humbled himself and he continued to work and serve. I mean, what humility. What a mighty man of God to just say, okay, I've done what I've done. I didn't get no recognition. They didn't give me no banquet. They didn't give me a day or the city key or whatever. But I'm gonna let God handle when I get elevated. That's amazing, because when we see this whole chapter 6 that changed the atmosphere, that changed the way of the Jews being killed over in Persia they were trying to be extinct. This is the change right here. A pagan king is going to do it. And even when we look at verse 4, it says, and the king said, who is in the court? Now Haman was come into the outward court of the king's house to speak unto the king to hang Mordecai on a gallows that he had prepared for him. And the king's servant said unto him, behold, Haman standeth in the court. And the king said, let him come in. So right here, Haman, he's there. The king evidently asked, okay, who's in the court? And they said Haman. Can you imagine? He was excited. They built this 75-foot gallows to hang Mordecai. He gets up early. He's excited. He gets into the court even earlier than what he may have always been going to the court. But this time he was getting to the court early because he wanted something done. So he entered the court, and his idea was to ask the king to hang Mordecai. See, the king asked who was in the court, and obviously the tables were being turned even at this time. Everything that was meant for evil against the Jews was turning out for good for them. And we know that we've had experiences, and you can talk about that. You can talk about other people in the Bible that what Satan meant for evil, God turned it around for their good. The life of Joseph, the brothers was trying to get rid of him, but at the end, he ended up in the palace and saving their life from famine. So what comfort this must have been to the original Jewish readers in post-exilic Palestine as they observed their tenuous position among the nations. They could rejoice in the fact that God cared about them and that he would continue to preserve them as he had under King Xerxes. So when Haman was ushered into the king's presence, he probably felt honored. He felt like, oh yeah, the king, we kind of got a good relationship now. We just had, I had dinner with him, which is unusual because he usually eats by himself and nobody else eats with him. But I ate with him and Queen Esther. So, and he bragged about it the night before. So now, verse 5, and the king's servant said unto him, behold, Haman standeth in the court, and the king said, let him come in. Verse 6, so Haman came in, the king said unto him, what shall be done unto the man whom the king delighted to honor? Now Haman thought in his heart, to whom would the king delight to do honor more than myself? You see, he's excited because now he gets in front of the king. He know they just had this dinner last night. So who else? He's thinking to himself, oh, the king wants to honor me. That's why I had dinner with him. That's why we sat together. And it was just us. He felt like privileged. And it was like, wow. And so he's saying, with the delight and honor myself. So Haman, he begins to answer. Let's see how he answers. He says, Haman answered the king, and he's thinking about himself as he's talking, like he's the one that's going to be honored. So he said, for the man the king delighted to honor, let the royal apparel be brought, which the king uses to wear, and the horse that the king rideth upon, and the crown royal which is set upon his head. Which is set upon, he said, let the royal apparel be brought. To wear a dress previously worn by the king was under ordinary circumstances. It was actually a breach of Persian law, but the king might allow it. And the king could also condone it. Now the horse that the king rideth upon, rather a horse that the king hath ridden, that's what it says. And the crown royal which is set upon his head, rather, and that hath a crown royal set on his head. Some peculiar ornament by which the royal steed was made conspicuous is intended, not his own crown, which even Xerxes would scarcely have allowed another to wear. So the dress and the horse are referred to, but the crown as an adjunct of the horse, not really particularized. So we see he wanted all these things that he knew that was against Persian law, and he knew that the king could only approve it for a person to wear these items. So he's excited. He thinks it's him, man. And he's thinking about, man, if the public, if the people see me ride this horse with the kings, they're gonna know I am somebody. And look, it says, let this apparel and horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most noble princes. He said, and then let another, even though he's the most noble prince at this time, he said, get another noble prince, that they may array the man with all whom the king delighteth to honor, and bring him on horseback through the street of the city, and proclaim him before him. Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delighteth to honor. Again, he's thinking about himself. This is who the king wants to honor. And then we get to verse 10. It says, then the king said to Haman, make haste, quickly, and take the apparel and the horse, as thou hast said, and do even so to Mordecai the Jew, that sitteth at the king's gate, that nothing fail of all that thou hast spoken. So we see the table has turned. You see here Now, the king is telling him to move quickly. And remember, with haste, the king would have no more delay in a matter which has been delayed for too long. 5 years. He said, no, we have to get this done quickly. We need to do this. And it's hastened, because the same thing in chapter 5, when they quickly built this gallows, they hastened, they quickly done it. And now he was quickly trying to get Mordecai to be hung. But look how this turn of event, now he has to quickly go get Mordecai and honor him with all of these things. Man, it's amazing. Because ain't it amazing? Mordecai, he's sitting at the king's gate, and can you imagine? This guy Haman comes to him and say, hey, we're going to have to honor you. The same man he did not stand up for, the same man who passed him, he did not honor. So now this guy has to come and get Mordecai and honor him. Wow. Won't God make your enemies turn around and be a blessing to you? He says, the king, he said Mordecai's nationality and his employment were probably mentioned in the book of the Chronicles. So from these, the king has learned them. And so he said, let nothing fail. Observe every particular of honor that you have mentioned, that there be no omission of one jot or tittle. Like he said, everything you said must be done to honor Mordecai. Then verse 11, then took Haman the apparel and the horse and arrayed Mordecai and brought him on horseback through the street of the city and proclaimed him before him. Thus shall it be done unto the man whom the king delighteth to honor. Then he took Haman the apparel. It was impossible for Haman to excuse himself. There was no ground on which he could decline the office thrust upon him. Reluctantly, without a word, he performed exactly what the king wanted him to do. And that was to give honor to Mordecai, the Jew. So we see in verse 12, and can you imagine Mordecai? After 5 years, all of a sudden he gets the promotion, he gets the publicity, he gets the recognition that he deserved 5 years ago, but he waited. And he waited till the right time, God's time. Because once God elevates you, can't no other person take you down. Because once God lifts you up, you will continue. If man lifts you up, they can bring you right back down. But when God does it, he's going to keep you in that position. My. So let's go to verse 12. As he complains of his misfortune, Haman's friends tell him of his final destiny. See, and Mordecai came again to the king's gate, but Haman hasted to his house, mourning and having his head covered. And then, see, Mordecai came, he returned, that is, to his former condition and employment after parading in the street. Right, everybody saw him riding on the king's horse, having his apparel on. Now he goes back to his own former condition and employment. So now he has been honored. The high honor done him was regarded as sufficient reward. And then we see verse 13. And Haman told Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends everything that had befallen him. Then said his wise men and Zeresh, his wife, unto him, if Mordecai be of the seed of the Jews, before whom thou hast begun to fall, thou shalt not prevail against him, but shalt surely fall before him. Let me just go on and read this last verse. And while they were yet talking with him, came the king's chamberlains and hasted to bring Haman unto the banquet that Esther had prepared. So we see verse 13. They've come to get Haman. And he's already told them, the people, his friends, it talks about, then said his wise men and Zeresh, his wife. His wise men may be people that had wisdom or magi's, who was having the habit of always consulting. So they were part of his friends. So we see that he said, if Mordecai be of the seed of the Jews, it's difficult to understand how this could any longer be regarded as doubtful. His fellow servants knew it. In Esther, the 3rd chapter, verse 4. Haman knew it. That is in verse 6. Xerxes knew it in verse 10. The wise men professed to regard it as uncertain, perhaps to give their words a more oracular character. He said, thou shalt surely fall. In other words, you're going to fall, Haman, because of what you want to do. And then it says, came the king's chamberlains and hasted to bring him. It was a custom, not elsewhere mentioned as Persian, but with the Oriental ideals, that they would come when the king told them to go get a servant, and they would be escorted as guests. And that was like important, especially it being escorted back to the palace or being escorted by the chamberlains or these people to a place of entertainment or home. It was considered an honor. But now, can you imagine Haman? He was, that morning he woke up excited. He was happy. He was going to be honored. He was going to get rid of Mordecai. But then all of a sudden, we see the script has flipped. Amen. There's been a change. And now his feelings, his emotions that he had that was real high first, now he's being fearful. He's being scared because he don't know now what is going to happen. He's going off to this banquet that he was so happy about. Now he's dreading to even go. And he may have well wondered what the king would even say now to him at the banquet. I mean, Haman, he stands as a prototype of all anti-God activists who oppose God's people. Like authors of many short stories, God led the author of the book of Esther to make his historical figures into symbols of much larger proportions. They could therefore rest assured that in the future, God would do the same for them. When they look back on this book of Esther and they read this book of Esther down in the future, when they read this, then they will see, man, just like God protected the Jews, us back then, he will protect us even now. That would give them confidence and assurance. So even though God's people often disobeyed him, even though they were often not spiritually or even physically where God wanted them to be, deliverance would come. God was so working history that he would be vindicated and his people delivered. And that's even for you and I, because now we have been engrafted in this church age, and this is the church, which is Jew and Gentile together. So therefore, we are all part of God's family. And just like he protected the Jews and he was sovereign over them, he is also sovereign over us, and he will order our steps. But our job is not to try to get ahead of him, but to just listen to God and be patient and be humble and understand that God's time is not our time. But when our time comes, we will be able to rejoice and enjoy what God has for us. Well, that's Esther chapter 6. I don't want to do too much of your work, but I know you guys are going to continue to look and research and do more work with this chapter 6. I'll be popping in on some of your classes. And don't forget to email Brother Josh and myself your link. So therefore, we can visit your classes. God bless you, and we love you.